Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the Giants. I've recorded 2 other branded podcasts today, and I had to remember which sponsor was for this one. John Schmeelk, Lance Medow with you. We're not going to do any college prospect school reports today. We are going to have Dan Salmone from the owners' meeting joining us in just a second, and we'll do a little bit of reaction. Lance hasn't reacted to the Jameis Winston signing yet. No, you did Jameis.
Russell Wilson.
You didn't do Russell yet, yes. And Jameis did become official yesterday. Dom, is that up on the huddle yet, the audio of the Jameis interview, or not yet? It'll be up as soon as this is over. That was my surprise that I mentioned yesterday, and then various reasons it did not get up yesterday. We'll get up today shortly, so that'll be your Giants Huddle podcast coming your way today. All right, let's go down to Florida. Beautiful, I think Orlando, right? That's where they're at the owners' meetings, and we're joined once again by one of our, I guess he's our chief head writer now for Giants.com, the one and only Dan Salmone. Dan, I don't do titles here. How do you like head honcho? Does that work for you?
A lot of uncertainty.
Oh, head honcho. That's perfect. Yeah, I like that. How about that?
Okay, so Brian Daboll spoke this morning. My understanding is that he respected a lot of the questions. And he appreciated a lot of the questions. Those are the ones mostly he chose not to answer. But and most of those were about the draft prospects. The one thing he did talk about with the draft prospects I want to ask you about and get your take on, I thought he went into an interesting conversation about how they evaluate the quarterbacks and all that goes into it and how important all of the aspects of it are. How he said, he used the word trust a lot. You have to trust the private workout. You have to trust how you talk to him about what's going on the board in these private meetings. And I thought there's a lot of detail and depth that the Giants are putting into these quarterback evaluations. And I think it's pretty clear they understand how important this process is for making sure the future for the Giants is a lot better than the last 5 to 10 years have been.
Yeah, and one thing that he's talked about, they've kind of been out there, how he doesn't typically go to the pro days. He loves these private workouts. You get a more intimate setting. At these pro days, everything is so scripted and rehearsed, but when you get them into your own thing, you can script them out for them. So we like to get them in that setting, see how they can respond to things and things like that.
Well, on a related note with respect to evaluating prospects, Dan, and by the way, our audience, Dan did a nice breakdown and write-up of all of the key components that Brian Daboll spoke about as a complimentary piece of this conversation. But clearly, to me, and I'll piggyback off of John's comments, Dan, and we've talked about it on the show, he may have not said it, but he seemed to lay out the fact that conviction is important in the room, especially when you're trying to determine if you want to go in the direction of a quarterback. And it's not so much what the speculation is on the outside, it's what everybody in the room thinks and whether or not everybody's on the same page, regardless of all the noise on the outside. And I'm curious your perspective of what you sense in terms of what you said.
Yeah, exactly. I think, Schmeelk, you wrote about that in Cover 3. I think that was your theme, whatever it was this week or last week. Don't get so caught up in where the outside thinks where a guy should go and reaches, and you get into that whole scenario. It's all about how you feel about this guy. And especially at the quarterback, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and Dan, and I'm going to connect what Brian Daboll said today to what Joe Shane spoke about yesterday when you were on with Matt and Paul. And Joe, they kept trying to get him to commit to picking a quarterback at 3, and I get it. That makes sense, right? But Joe was very clear, look, we're going to pick a quarterback if the value meets where we're drafting. And he was pretty vociferous about not pushing a quarterback up too far and unnaturally based on where they're rated on the Giants draft board. And even though Brian Daboll didn't use those words today, that was the same type of vibe that I got, where it's, guys, look, I'd love to have a franchise quarterback. We all would, but you can't force one because then that eventually is going to backfire.
Yeah, exactly. That's why they're fired up about the Russell Wilson and Jameis signings. But now you're in a position where you don't have to do that. You're not backed into the corner. That was the phrase that Joe was using, and they had all these parallel tracks of all these options going through free agency and everything, and the outcome now they'd be happy playing a game right now if they don't have one, and then they'll see how the draft board falls. Come 3 weeks from now.
Last one on the quarterbacks for me, going to the veterans now. You mentioned Russell Wilson. What do you say, 15,000 plays? 7,500 plays?
So that's going to be my next article, I think. I looked up how many it was of each. It's about basically 7,500 plays of his between throwing and running. And Daboll said he looked at every single one since he was drafted in 2012. So he's got, he said he was going through his evaluation. He likes his decisions with the football. And obviously, he's not as athletic as he used to be in 13 and 14, but he can still create some things with his legs. And then lastly, the deep ball is the thing. So he's a phenomenal deep ball thrower. And that gets him excited with, the skilled players the Giants have on the outside. They have, some fast guys out there. It was nice to get Slayton back in there, obviously with Neighbors, and then also Theo Johnson able to get down in the seam.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you brought up Theo Johnson because on a related note, Dan, my pickup from Jameis's and Russell's press conferences with the media, they both highlighted specifically Theo in particular. Not to say that the other guys aren't critical, but they made it a point to say, hey, this is a talented player, whether he's a tight end or a wide receiver, that's going to play an integral role in the passing attack. And I'm sure Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen love the fact that Russell pretty much could have given an in-and-out evaluation of the roster backwards and forwards before he even had one snap during OTAs thus far.
Yeah, Joe was saying, that's the unique thing about the quarterbacks. They come in, they do the homework on, your roster. So you have to... Yeah. So they all know that because they know, their success is so dependent on what's around them. And, back to Theo Johnson, everybody sees what an elite dynamic tight end can do for an offense, and that excites them. And they actually, another tidbit somebody did ask about Lil Jordan Humphrey, too, about possibly moving to tight end. And Daboll said, we'll see, we'll get them in here April 21st and go from there.
Got to admit, I hold a little grudge against Lil Jordan. He did not mention possibly moving to tight end when I interviewed him. I asked him about playing receiver.
I don't know if it was a reporter from out of town that had known him before. Somebody kind of came in randomly with that question, but it was a good little tidbit in there.
Yeah, Benjamin Albright. Benjamin Albright, who covers the Broncos out there. He does a talk show in Denver.
Oh, was that him?
Yeah, I don't know if he was a reporter, but he had tweeted about that shortly after the signing became official. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, Little Jordan, I was asking you about this stuff, and you didn't mention you're going to play tight end. I mean, come on, man.
Big Jordan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he is not a small man. I want to ask you a little bit about the offense, and I thought Brian Daboll's answer to this question was interesting. Curious to see what your take was on it. He was asked about that. Basically, look, you're going to have potentially 10 of your 11 starters back on offense, depending on what happens in the draft, and whether or not that was kind of part of the core plan. What did you think of Brian Daboll's response to that?
Yeah, he kind of, in the top, and then he kind of gave a little mini State of the Union address at the beginning. He did put out, still 40% of the roster's different. That's the entire roster heading into the draft. But we've seen it before. I think we've talked about it before. Quarterback can, it elevates everyone. So even if a lot of the other pieces are the same on the offense, quarterback play can elevate everyone's play there, and that's the entire offense.
And related to what you just laid out, and this is going more to your conversation, Dan, with Joe Schoen, I loved his response when you were asking about Jameis Winston and the priority of the quarterback depth chart. He pointed out without any hesitation that the Giants have utilized 7 different quarterbacks in the last 2 years, and also with Andrew Thomas's injury, what they seem to have learned, right, in previous history is that you're not going to go into the season again and roll the dice and hope for the best. They want to make sure that the second-tier players are more than capable of keeping the offense afloat and not just necessarily at the quarterback position. How accurate of an assessment did you get based on Joe's response to that?
Yeah. Lance, you're Mr. Depth, right? That's what it's all about.
You know better than anybody, so.
Yeah. No, but it's just 7 quarterbacks in the last 2 years and all those offensive line combinations. Joe's confident in that offensive line, those first 6 weeks before Andrew Thomas went down again. He liked the way it was performing. He thought they were performing at a level enough to give the chance the team to win. And so you can't have one thing derail that. That's why it was big to get Hudson in there, lock down another swing tackle, and then go from there.
Yeah, and look, I thought Joe Schoen yesterday, and this is going past what Daboll said today, boy, he was very just James Hudson's our swing tackle. Like, that was important for us to bring him in. I think all of us kind of thought like it could be like a Stone Forsythe James Hudson competition. Doesn't seem that way. It seems like this is Hudson's gig.
Yeah, he seemed pumped up about it. He kind of brought up. It always catches your attention when somebody brings somebody up, unprompted, and that he was one of those guys a couple times.
So the plans may be set in stone, is what you're saying, at least at this point.
Oh, there we go.
Just not for Mr. Forsyth.
No, exactly. If you want to use that as a title, Dan, for one of your upcoming articles, you have my permission. I just want the audience to know that I came up with it first here at approximately 12:43 p.m. Eastern. Yes, there we go.
So you're telling me Stone Forsyth might be up the river when all is said and done?
Yes, well, the
Hudson
puns
River?
just roll.
No.
Correct, yes. There you go. We could play paddle ball all day long as Dan tries to fit in some insight here in the conversation.
Jokes.
I want to stay on the draft side of things because the other topic that came up, Dan, with Brian Daboll was Travis Hunter and whether or not the Giants would entertain him at 3. And the other thing that I don't know if Giants fans are very aware of, and I'm curious your perspective, is Troy Brown is on the coaching staff. And what's interesting, Dan, about Troy Brown, as you know, with the Patriots, is he played wide receiver and DB. And not everybody has excelled on both sides of the ball, even on the NFL level. What correlation did you get out of Brian bringing up Troy Brown and whether or not they could use his experience in further evaluating Hunter?
Yeah, I think, and Daboll kind of went through, some of the staff changes, and Troy was one of them, and just having a lot of NFL experience there, and can relay all that. But with Travis Hunter, Daboll kind of had a good line. It's really fun to evaluate him, but it takes a long time. There's a lot, there's a lot of stuff to go through. He said he's a fun guy to evaluate, and they're going to evaluate him at both positions and then see what would be the best going forward if that were the case.
Yeah, and Dan, what jumped out to me, you mentioned how kind of Joe Shane brought up James Hudson, unprompted. He was prompted, Brian Daboll was today, but the level of enthusiasm in his voice when he talked about Javon Holland, and Dave's get that, right? Like his voice kind of rises a little bit, and he comes out of his shell, and he gets all excited. And we saw a little bit of a pulse of Debo, but Javon Holland, you could tell he is pumped up to coach this guy.
Oh, yeah, that struck me too. Same thing with Joe. Daboll, I think his word today was he thinks the world of him. And, it's going back to their days because I guess he was pretty high on their list back in Buffalo when he was coming out of college. And, he's pumped up. So that's one guy you definitely want to pay attention to going forward to have a big year.
And, once again, I'm glad you touched on that last statement about when he was in Buffalo because this has been a theme, it seems, Dan, since Joe Shane came aboard. The emphasis on why you want to do your due diligence in the draft, even if you don't get a guy, because maybe 3 to 4 years later, when they hit free agency, all of the homework you put in and the background info that you gathered actually proves to be beneficial in determining sort of what Brian Daboll went into, where he prefers private workouts as opposed to other settings because you get to know the player in a more intimate setting. It seemed as if Joe emphasized the groundwork they put in on Holland and Debo when he was in Buffalo seemed to pay off in helping them bring them into the Giants organization here. At least that was my takeaway.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. You're spot on. That's exactly. NFL's a relationship business, and you're not doing things just for now. It's for the future. Kind of like like when we're at the combine, getting coverage for the combine. It's not just for now, but it's for for down the road. For a potential player to go back and use his content. It's kind of the same kind of thing.
Dan, anything that else jumped out to you with either Joe yesterday or Dave's today that you didn't touch on with either Paul and Matt yesterday or with Lance and I today?
No, I think just the overall thing now. I think the major theme coming out is just not backed into a corner, particularly at number 3, which I think, is where you want to be. You want to be in a spot where you feel like you could play a game right now, and that's what Joe thinks with the roster. And, and now everyone's just fired up to get everybody together. April 21st, it's going to be another busy week. You have the draft, players back in the building, and then start to build this thing again.
How did you not ask an Ohio State question while you're out there?
What did I know, we got to get some, right?
Come on, Dan, what are you doing? Like, you need to start planting the seeds now. Joe's going to come back from these owner meetings. All the scouts are going to be in the building, I think, starting on Wednesday. They're going to start getting the draft board ready. You need to start, just very subtly mentioning Ohio State players, getting them in the head, so that maybe you actually draft a couple this year.
Yeah, well, if you just walk by my desk, I think I've made my myself pretty clear there.
Is subliminal messaging that Dan has set up.
Yeah, that's the route I'm taking. Yeah,
I don't think Joe Shane spends a lot of time on that side of the building. I'm not going to lie, Dan. I think I think you might have to start randomly like putting up pictures on the other side of the like you just put some on the wall so he walks by. Hey, look, Donovan Jackson. How about that?
Yeah. Just start getting some OHs under my breath as I walk by. Yeah.
Tyreek Williams. Exactly.
A pathway from the cafeteria all the way to Joe Shane's office.
Yes, correct. Yeah. Dan, safe flight, my friend. Are you back here tomorrow?
Yeah. Oh, I fly back tomorrow.
Nice. So enjoy the rest of your day. Hit the pool. Hit the beach.
I don't know if I can get this writing done fast enough, but yeah.
Well, luckily we're not distracting you from it at all, so that's good. Dan, good stuff, my friend. Get to writing. Enjoy. Say hi to Pearson for us. Dom's already taken the nameplate off of his desk, so just warn him he's going to have to do some housekeeping when he gets back, all right?
Of course.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Good stuff, Dan.
All right.
Awesome stuff.
Thanks, guys.
Dan Salmone doing yeoman's work down there at the owners' meeting in Orlando, where, Lance, we had a lot of other news come out today in terms of some of the rule changes. I believe from what I saw, only one was adopted today, and that was on kickoffs. Touchbacks will now go to the 35-yard line instead of the 30. The goal there obviously is to try to keep teams from kicking it into the end zone and out of the end zone to get more kickoffs. I think Kevin Seifert from ESPN, one of their analytics guys, says they believe the kickoff return rate could double from 30% to 60% with this rule change. So I like that rule change. I'm excited for it. And most of the other ones, I believe, were tabled until the May meeting. So,
well, specifically the tush push, which has been a huge topic of discussion. Actually, Brian Dable was asked about that. He jokingly said, tush push has been a big topic of discussion. I had no clue. So a little humor that he threw in there. And this has been something through whispering, it seems, the whole process, the entire offseason, about everybody determining, is it going to be overturned? Is it going to be eliminated? Nick Sirianni clearly has been vocal because I saw a comment from him. He said, well, listen, 3 of my assistants are now head coaches. They benefited from the tush push. I better have all of their votes.
Yeah, he's like texting guys.
Yeah, exactly. So there seems to be a campaign trail with respect to people trying to jockey for position to determine whether or not the competition committee will get rid of it.
I wouldn't ban it myself. But
no, neither would I. Listen, here's where my belief is when it comes to sports in general. Find a way to stop it. The goal is, or the quick response should not be, well, we eliminate something that is successful for one team in particular. I think you should now focus on finding ways then to prevent it and stop it.
And the way I look at it, if you ban that, this whole scrum, push a running back and pick him up and carry him down the field 10 or 15 yards down the field, then that should be gone too. If you're going to get rid of pushing guys, then get rid of pushing guys. It shouldn't just be that one play. They already outlaw pulling people. You can't pull people over the end zone, over the goal line, or over the first down line, right? Then maybe you can't push him either. And I would be fine with that. Make the player do it on his own and not get propelled by a teammate. If you want to make that a universal rule, I would be okay with that. But I don't want to just do this, because to your point, it seems like you're just outlawing a rule that one team, to be quite honest with you, is just much better at it than everybody else. We saw the Bills try the tush push against the Chiefs 3 times in that AFC playoff game, and they got stopped.
Yeah,
they couldn't do it, and Josh Allen's 245 pounds. So I'm with you. If there was data showing that it was a dangerous play, then that's a different conversation, player safety. But we haven't seen that data. So.
Yeah, I know that there was some conversation I thought earlier today. I haven't had a chance to review the comments where there were members of the competition committee determining whether or not there are safety issues, but I haven't seen anything.
Doug McDermott brought that up.
That has been brought to the forefront that is overwhelming to convince me that it should be eliminated from a safety perspective. The only thing that, to me, has been brought out is the fact that it's an unfair advantage because the Eagles do it and execute it better than anybody else. And that, to me, is not good enough rationale to eliminate a play. But I think you brought up an interesting point. Hold on a minute. If you're going to allow offensive linemen to push a running back in the normal aspect of the field to try to gain a first down, what's the difference between added momentum from teammates versus the tush push where you're trying to get a yard for a 3rd and 1 conversion or a 4th and 1 conversion or on the goal line? You're still utilizing leverage from teammates to help leapfrog another player. So you can't pick and choose where you want to give an advantage to a team. It should be even across the board.
I'm with you. Apparently, and I was just recording draft season, so I'm trying to catch up on what came out of the owners' meetings over the last hour. Apparently, the league will now distribute a full list of actions that will be unsportsmanlike conduct in games after scores and everything. And a demonstration video. I would pay to see that video.
Well, like they do currently when they talk about specific plays.
You get someone from the officiating department mimicking the illegal actions in the NFL offices. I think that could be pretty amusing.
Well, it'd be like a movie scene.
Yes, correct.
What's that?
Yes.
I forget which movie it is where the official acts out. He gave him the business or something. Two players are fighting. I'll come up with it maybe by the end of the program. But that's what it would probably be something similar to with respect to behavior. And I understand they're trying to get in front before it explodes about things that may tick off players. But, I've been on the record many times. This is sports entertainment at the end of the day. As long as you're not hurting another individual, I have no problem with the entertainment value of the league.
Playoff seeding proposal by the Lions got tabled. That's going to be readdressed in May. Is that correct, or is that voted down with the divisions?
You're talking about they were arguing when a team that is second in the division. Right?
Winning the division doesn't matter.
Well,
it's just based
I completely disagree. If that's what the Lions are arguing, I am completely against that being implemented.
And it sounds like that there was some support for that. That got tabled. The Lions also proposed a rule, and I have not seen any word on this, to eliminating the automatic first down on illegal contact and defensive holding.
Yeah.
I have not seen anything come out of the league meetings about that. Oh, and they moved the overtime rules in the playoffs. That will now be in the regular season as well, where both teams are guaranteed a possession. But it's only going to be a 10-minute period, not a 15-minute period. I disagree with that. But they're making slow progress the way they should go. Usually that's how the NFL works in these situations.
Yeah, well, the rule for overtime, of course, was all because of the Bills' complaints based on happening in the Kansas City playoff game. So I wasn't necessarily in favor of them even tweaking the rule just because of, once again, one team's complaints. And I was fine with it being in overtime. I'm not fond of it now being implemented in the regular season. I don't think the system was broken from that standpoint. Remember, there's offense and defense in football, John. You should have to win with both ways, and you should have to lose with both ways. We don't all of a sudden guarantee a possession for everybody if your defense cannot fulfill the job. So I was totally fine with how overtime was operating before this became controversial with the Buffalo Bills. As far as the Lions and the whole divisional structure, first of all, the way the NFL is laid out is the scheduling is based on divisional play. Okay, everything you have within the division is even across the board with the exception of the two other games that you play. And now, of course, there's 3 with 17 games. If you get rid of the whole guiding force of the division, what is the incentive of winning your division title? The incentive of winning the division title is that you automatically get to the playoffs and you have an edge over wild card teams. If you're going to eliminate that, then why do we have an NFL season structured based on divisional play? There's no purpose.
I agree. Beat the teams in your division, win your division.
And I don't understand the Lions, after they're coming off a season in which they had the number 1 seed, the timing of all of this doesn't make much sense.
I would say the Lions' 2 rule proposals are very self-motivated.
Well, but I guess I don't understand for the divisional standpoint.
If they lost one more game, they would have had the second best record in the conference, but they would have been like the Vikings got screwed. They were the 5 seed.
Yeah,
even though they won 13 games, they won 14. Even were they 14-3?
May have both won 14. I could look that up. It's all a blur.
I get it. So. And then the other funny one, and I didn't realize this when I talked about this a couple weeks ago, on the eliminating the automatic first down on the 5-yard defensive holding and illegal contact. The Lions led the league in both those penalties by almost 10.
How convenient.
Like, so far out in front of everybody else, and it's like, maybe you should change the rules there. I think in that case specifically, when the rule change that's being suggested is so self-serving, I think people would tend not to vote for that if it seems to, just be, you don't really help us. Maybe you don't give first downs on the thing that we do all the time. Probably not what you're looking for.
And I'm hoping, it seems obvious that the other teams may have picked up on that, and that's why this was not implemented. Lions won 15 games, Vikings won 14.
14, yeah.
So, but here's the thing. It's no different than, John, if you remember, a few years ago, everybody was debating when the NFC South had a team with a sub-500 record. The NFC East had it one year when Washington won the division.
I think there was a 7-game division winner in one of those divisions,
correct.
Right?
Well, Washington won the division. Mm-hmm. They had 7. The point is, you don't change rules for rare occurrences. I'm not
Correct.
a believer in that. It's cyclical. There's going to be down years for certain divisions, but we don't rock the boat because that happens once every 10 years or whatever it may be.
No, I'm with you.
It's unnecessary.
I agree. All right, let's go to the calls. 201-939-4513, 201-939-4513. Draft season, that should hopefully be going up either later on today or early tomorrow morning. We'll figure that out. We're working on that. Check it out. Tony Paulie and I do our top 10 position rankings on offense, so that'll come out. Fun talk about all those groups, including the quarterback. So go check that out. All right, let's go to Jake in Columbus, Ohio. Speaking of Ohio State, he will lead us off today. Jake, what's going on?
How's it going, fellas? Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for calling. What do you got?
So I got two separate things here, but both pertain to the draft.
Sure.
The first one is when it comes to Kayvon Thibodeau, I feel like we can't pay somebody top of the market money while we also have Brian Burns under contract. So in 2 years, when, assuming we pick up the fifth-year option, we have to pay him, that might be tough anyways. Do you feel like trading him now for an asset as opposed to potentially losing him for nothing makes sense?
I think you're getting really ahead of yourself with respect to that hypothetical, Jake. I mean, as long as he is on a rookie contract, especially when we're still talking about a 2-year timeline, I don't see the urgency. Plus, I would argue, let's go down the hypothetical road and saying you don't want to pay both simultaneously. You could argue his value could increase with more experience on the field, that in the event you did want to explore a trade, and I'm just going based on your hypothetical, I'm not saying they necessarily should do this, you could then get more bang for your buck in the event that you entertain moving him. So to me, it's way too premature to even think about that.
Yeah, and his fifth-year option, if he does not make the Pro Bowl this year, his fifth-year option is going to come in at about $14.7 million, which is a very reasonable number. So, look, if you get to the point, especially, like, let's say you draft an Abdul Carter, right, and you go into next year and you say, all right, well, we don't want to pay the second guy, then you could talk about it then. I understand that, but I'm with Lance. I think we're a little bit too early for that, unless you're trading him for another really good player. Like, if you find that you can get a better player at a different position, that's fine, but I wouldn't, move him for some kind of future asset at this point.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. And then my other question is around the quarterback in the draft. I am operating under the assumption that Cam Ward is going to be gone, and I personally feel like Shedeur is going to be gone.
Both could be.
The reason for that is they told Myles Garrett something that made him feel comfortable. And the only known quantity that they could tell him is Shedeur Sanders, because they don't know about Kirk Cousins and they don't know about some of these other options.
Actually,
maybe later in the draft.
Jake, real quick, I got some inside information. Do you know what the Browns told Myles Garrett?
What?
We're going to pay you $40 million a year.
That was what they told him.
I think that's what
they
told
showed
Myles
him.
Garrett.
They didn't tell him.
Yeah, that's correct.
They laid it out on the table.
They actually let him swim in a vat of ones that equaled $40 million, and that was pretty much how that went, I think.
Yeah, I don't think a rookie potential quarterback convinced him.
No, but Jake, I think what we've heard from more than the Garrett thing, I think what we've heard from the owners' meetings, from Jimmy Haslam, I think I saw a Stefanski quote, it sure sounds like the Browns know they need the next thing at quarterback. So for that reason, it would not shock me at all if Shedeur Sanders is a second overall.
Well, Jimmy Haslam's quote, and I'll let you continue, Jake, it was a swing and a miss on Deshaun Watson. That's what he said on the record.
Which means you're punting the ball down the field and you've given up as strong, but needless to say, you're looking for your next guy.
Yep.
Well, being in Ohio, I can tell you there's a lot of Cleveland people that are happy he finally said it. As far as the Giants go, who would you say has the most upside in this draft as a quarterback? Because to me, it's Jalen Milroe. And if we are going to take a swing, I want to take a swing at somebody who has the highest upside. We've set ourselves up so that we don't need to push it. We can take best player available for most of the time, but obviously, it's been said that we need to find our quarterback of the future. I feel like Jalen Milroe is the guy that we can take and let him sit, and he doesn't need to be rushed and has the opportunity to get into that top 8 quarterback range that you need to compete in this league, and I'll take the rest off the air. I appreciate you guys.
I think that's a great question, Jake, and I think you're thinking about it the right way. Because I said this, I did a radio hit on our Pennsylvania radio affiliate yesterday, and I said, look, you leave a draft, Lance, and you draft the 16th best wide receiver, you feel pretty good about that, right? Like, I got really good wide receivers, 16th best receiver in the league, you feel great. But if you draft the 16th best quarterback, you're like, eh. You know, like it doesn't move the needle as much.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So that's why the evaluation process for the position is different for quarterback than it is for anything else. You really need to hit it for it to really matter for you, right? To really be a game changer. So I think you're framing the question the right way. I think Jalen Milroe probably has the highest upside, but I think Tyler Shough has a terrific upside as well. He can run. He's big. He's tall. He's got a cannon. The problem with him is that he's 26. So how much more improvement is there going to be? But he doesn't have a ton of snaps in college because of all the injuries. So, and I think Shough has a better chance of reaching his ceiling than Milroe does. I mean, since he has less to go. Like, if you just compare in a vacuum and you look at Milroe's 2024 play versus Shough's 2024 play, Shough's tape is so much better. Like, it's not close. So I think Shough's closer to getting there, even though maybe the upside's not quite as high, just because Jalen Milroe, I mean, he gets into the league, Lance. He's immediately a top 5 athletic quarterback, top 3 athletic quarterback. The guy's a freak show. He's unbelievable. But those would be the two guys that I would think about on day 2 if you're trying to target a high upside pick.
With Shough, based on your description, it reminds me of when Brandon Weeden was drafted by Cleveland. Brandon was also very old. Yeah. I'm just saying, older, in terms of the comparison to other quarterbacks.
Chris
and
Winkie
sometimes
action.
Yeah,
Chad Hutchinson, you want to go there?
Absolutely. Teams shy away from that because also, think about this. If you're going to sit the quarterback, by the time he then starts, let's say 2 to 3 years down the road, you're talking about somebody that's 28, 29 years old, John.
I mean, you're still getting a second contract out of him.
You are.
You're getting 10 years out of him, but you're not getting that third contract out of him.
Yeah. Well, and you also wonder, Father Time at the end of the day, regardless of how much baggage and experience, doesn't necessarily slow down just because the quarterback had not been out there for as long. So I think you have to keep that in mind. What I'd be curious about data-wise is how many quarterbacks have been selected maybe between rounds 2 through 4 have sat and actually have panned out. That's just something I'm asking all the time. One guy I'm going to throw out that I'm reminded of is Matt Schaub. Because if you remember, the Atlanta Falcons drafted Matt Schaub. They didn't do anything with him. And then they wound up trading him to the Houston Texans, and Houston got a starting quarterback out of that. But outside of that example, and notice that example, I would say, is as closest to a success story as you're going to find, because Schaub became a multi-year starter. I don't want to hear about a guy that maybe had a flash here or there. I'm talking about somebody that solidified that position. Recent past history, Schaub to me is the best one off the top of my head that I could come up with. Not to say that the Giants can't go down that route, but you have to take into consideration how high is the percentage of that panning out, even if you're talking about a quarterback that may or may not have some high upside.
No, I'm with you. And I did, here it is. So earlier this year, Lance, you weren't on these shows yet. I had stats saying pull all sorts of quarterback data for us, okay? So I have it separated rounds 2 and 3 and then 4 and onward. So I'll give you rounds 2 and 3 together, right? Just so you kind of have an idea of what we're talking about. So quarterbacks drafted since the year 2000. The benchmark I wanted them to use is starting a divisional playoff game. That to me is a hit, okay? Because look, you can get into the first round of the playoffs, get blown out, and then disappear. We've seen poor quarterbacks do that. But to win a playoff game and get to the divisional round, that usually means that you're a real player, right? And there are other benchmarks you can use too. But that's the benchmark I decided to ask them to put together for me, so we have an idea of what this is looking at. So since the year 2000, these are the second and third round quarterbacks that have started playoff games. Any playoff game, okay? Or is this actually, I think this might be just divisional. But
well, still, we understand the standard.
So here are the guys. Drew Brees.
Okay.
Matt Schaub.
See.
Colin Kaepernick, who rested. He did not play right away, so that'd be another guy in your list that could be considered there, in consideration. Russell Wilson played right away. Does Brock Osweiler get you excited?
I don't know if I'd throw him under the same umbrella.
I would not. Nick Foles would be in that group. Jimmy Garoppolo, who I did not start right away for New England, obviously. So that's a guy that rested a while, came in, eventually won a second-round playoff game. And then Jalen Hurts. those would be the guys that have, in the second and third round, that have playoff starts.
But what I'm going to now add some more context here with Garoppolo, remember, he was moved to a different team before he flourished as a starter for a lengthy period of time. It didn't come to fruition in New England. I understand he had that one start when Brady was suspended, but my point is...
By the way, same for Schaub, though.
Yeah, well, that was why I brought that up. Schaub and Garoppolo are good examples, but they were moved to other teams. So once again, now the number's even smaller.
Was Foles drafted by the Eagles?
I don't believe so.
I don't think so, right?
No,
Didn't he get there later? So that'd be another guy in that list, and it was the second team that he ended up being a playoff.
And that's my point.
Yeah.
Well, no, he was actually a third-round pick of the Eagles in 2012.
Oh, but then he left
stints.
and he came back. Okay.
He then went to the Rams in 2015.
But it still wasn't his first team. It was his fourth stop.
Well, of course, before all of a sudden everything clicked.
Right.
Yeah, from a statistical standpoint and an opportunity standpoint. So, once again, I return to my premise that I don't think if you're banking on, all right, you're not going to take a quarterback at 3 and you're going to find somebody with upside in the third round or the fourth round. Not to say you shouldn't take a quarterback, but I think you got to be a little bit more realistic about this idea. Well, we'll sit him for 2 to 3 years and then he'll end up being the guy. The data just is not in favor.
Yeah, and that's why for a guy like Shook, I don't think you do sit him for 2 or 3 years. A guy like Milroe, he's younger. I think
the window's a little bit wider. As I knock off the water.
You almost did that during the Salmone interview. You saved it. You didn't save it that time.
No, this time I got a little bit more emotional and excited.
Yes,
over
you did.
Third and fourth round quarterbacks.
So if you want to have some fun, you want a fourth round and later quarterbacks that have made
absolutely.
playoff
While
games?
we're on topic,
I'll just give you some names. And for the fans that listened to the show a couple months ago, I apologize. Tom Brady obviously would be the big one. Mark Bolger is a good one for the Rams. Yep. And then you have all Tom Brady's. David Garrard for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Played in 2 playoff games in 2007. He got to the divisional round. Matt Castle for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Again, second team in
2010. I think Garrard was drafted by the Jaguars. If I'm not mistaken.
I believe Garrard was.
He was.
If anything, he was an undrafted free agent, but I'm pretty sure he was drafted.
Second Houston Texan quarterback getting into the mix here. Does T.J. Yates get you excited? He, believe it or not, got to the division round of the playoffs in 2012.
Well, that was the year where they had about 800 quarterbacks that got hurt.
Yeah, I just didn't remember I didn't remember that they got out of the wild card round, though. They beat the Bengals. The Bengals might have had a quarterback injury that year, too.
No, I think since he had Andy Dalton. I think that was one of the Dalton. Remember, they had made it 4 years in a row.
I know. I just can't believe they lost to them.
Yeah, because the year that Dalton got hurt, John, they played the Steelers. That was the helmet hit with Antonio Brown.
That's right.
And it was not T.J. Yates that was involved in that.
Joe Webb III for the Minnesota Vikings. Okay. Ryan Lindley for the Arizona Cardinals. Those are both injury substitutions.
Who's become a QB
They did
coach.
not get them there. Kirk Cousins. That's a good one.
Yeah.
A.J. McCarron. Again, that was a backup. That was he did not start that year. That was the year in 2015 that I think Dalton got hurt and A.J. McCarron had to go in for him. Dak Prescott. And then you have Kirk Cousins again, Dak Prescott. Brock Purdy obviously gets into the mix there. And then you can slot Skylar Thompson into that mix in 2022.
For the Dolphins, yes.
So it just doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. Well, Dak started immediately because of injuries, okay? And Kirk's a good example because Kirk was drafted, remember, the same year as RG3, and they had him on the depth chart. He then did take over as the starting quarterback. I thought he had a very nice season. Washington, though, decided after giving him a few franchise tags, they didn't want to pay him.
He never made the playoffs for Washington.
No. Well, that's...
Again, no, but I'm making the point.
Sure.
Second team again.
Until he went to, finally, the Vikings. Yep.
So, just some nuggets out there. Again, you're looking at just to give you the overall number, Lance, it was a 15%. I'm sorry, it was a little bit lower than that. 14% of the quarterbacks drafted in around 2 or 3 since the year 2000 got to a divisional playoff game. So you're looking at a 1 in 7 to 1 in 8 shot. So it's throwing darts. Like I know people say, I don't like the term of throwing darts. It feels like you're not trying. No, when you're 1 for 8, 1 for 7, like 14%, you're kind of throwing darts. That's kind of what you're doing.
Yeah.
In the second round. It's hard.
And listen, you could still do your homework and throw darts all during the week, but then when all of a sudden the matchup comes, it doesn't mean that you're going to hit the bullseye.
You could scream one more, Dom. And my theory on that was the reason the hit rate is lower, and I think it was, Mel Kiper did this exercise too on First Draft, their draft podcast, and the numbers for second and third round quarterbacks was a lot better in the 80s. And my theory for that was now quarterbacks get pushed up so much that actual second-round quarterbacks end up getting picked in the first round. So guys that actually have second-round grades end up being first-round quarterbacks. So the guys getting picked in round 2 are probably more like round 3 or round 4 quarterbacks, because the position gets pushed up so unnaturally. You get guys get overdrafted, and that's how you have these type of hit rates.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. The level of urgency to find the QB is a lot different when we're talking about in the 80s or the 70s, because it was a different game. Okay, you had maybe a run-heavy style type of game. Not to say the quarterback wasn't important, but the quarterback wasn't maybe life or death type of scenario. So as a result, now quarterbacks are going, as you laid out, much sooner. So therefore, 2s in the 1980s are now 1s, and 3s are 2s, and 4s are 3s, and you move it pretty much a round or 2 up the ladder.
Correct. I'm with you.
David Garrard, by the way, 4th rounder in 2002 by the Jaguars.
Okay. So that's one of the guys that stuck with his first team. But you're right. It hasn't happened a ton in terms of day 2 or 3 quarterbacks that have made the playoffs with their first team. I didn't look at that aspect of it, Lance. That's why I asked,
and I'm glad you brought up the chart. A little bit different angle based on what you spoke about earlier in the year.
That's a great point.
I think it makes a lot of sense given the question that was posed our way.
And I wonder how much of that is those guys getting drafted behind good quarterbacks just so they can never advance. Like Jimmy Garoppolo, right? He just couldn't advance past Tom Brady, so he had to move. But, a guy like Kirk Cousins, that wasn't the case. He had to move some, It is what it is. All right, let's go to Tim in Charleston. He's up next. Hey, Tim.
Hey, John. Hey, Lance.
Long time no speak, man. How are you feeling? You doing well?
Oh, yeah, I'm fine. It's been busy. It's been tough to get in, and when I called last week, I ended up getting cut off while I was on hold, but that's all right. Same points today, and then with the less, I got a last little comment for Lance as well at the end. But I'm very happy with the free agent, the way it's worked out so far. I feel like, we've gotten a lot better on defense. I'm glad we re-signed Van Roten, so we have somebody steady there, at least for the short term.
Yep.
And I never in my wildest dreams thought we'd get 2 veteran quarterbacks, so we're not in a situation where if we draft one, we have to worry about a rookie being thrust in prematurely because of an injury or something like that.
Lance is in quarterback depth heaven right now, Tim. Like, Lance's version of Nirvana is having 2 veteran quarterbacks as potential members of your depth chart.
Can never have enough at any position, specifically under center, as the Giants learned.
And the swing tackle is huge. The other thing, the one thing I'm still, and obviously we can address this in the draft, is the one concern I still have is the same one I had going into last year is
stopping the run.
But we'll see how that goes.
Tim, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. You cut out a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. I moved a little bit far away from my phone here. I said is the run defense.
Yeah, agreed.
Yep. Yeah. And actually, Brian Dable, Tim, addressed that. That was one of the things we didn't cover with Dan Salmone, and his response was, that is a team statistic. That falls on everybody with many different layers of the defense. Not to say that he was going to call out anyone in particular, but the emphasis on the fact that they brought in corners and safeties and defensive linemen, and they're hoping that the 3 levels improve, and therefore the run defense overall heads in the opposite direction.
And Adebo and Holland are good against the run, so they should help in some regard, but having a little bit more beef up the middle wouldn't be a bad thing either.
And then the question I have for you, John, is because I'm kind of sold on Tyler Shuck as well. And the question I have for you is about a draft position where you had actually said at one point last week you'd be okay with taking him with pick 34.
I think you have to.
There, because and that was my concern, because you don't know who might jump in there after you, and trading up, then you're giving up draft assets. So if you want to get him, just go get him.
Well, Tim, I'll bring a little news here. Because it's not up yet, but this will be a reason for you guys to go check out draft season. I was making my case for Tyler Shook on draft season, and Tony's not as high on him as I am. He has him like as a 5th or 6th quarterback. And he said, look, I was talking to people in the league, and there are people in the league that have him as their quarterback too. Dane Brugler, who I talked to at the Combine, he says there are people in the league that have him as their quarterback too. So despite the age, despite the injury, I would be shocked, Tim, if he would get to the Giants at the top of round 3, and I don't even know how deep into round 2 he's going to get. So I just don't know.
And I came to my conclusion based on those interviews that you had on there. But the one stat is in the 2 seasons that he did play 2 full seasons, in college, 2020 and 2024.
And by the way, the 2021 wasn't even completely full either. I think that got cut short too.
Well, that was the COVID season, so
Right.
There was only 7 games. So he played 19 games. He had 36 touchdown passes and only 12 interceptions. And I got to love that 3-to-1 ratio. And my last comment is just for Lance. Lance, when you weren't with us last year, I honestly didn't realize how much I missed you until you came back, because you really do add a different element to the show. And thanks for coming back.
Well, thank you for having me back. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Tim.
We're very happy to have Lance
I'll take
back.
it
Absolutely.
off here.
Yeah. No, it's very nice of you to say. We'll let that simmer in for John to ponder over the next few minutes.
I'm going to bathe in the love.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
I'm going to bathe in the love.
He couldn't even find the words to say.
I was going to say, right? Schmeelk is speechless.
No, I wasn't speechless.
Taken aback.
I enjoyed it. I was hoping to get a heart. Lance generally does not give. He's a very stoic person. I wanted to see if I can get a heartfelt response out of Lance.
Oh, I did. Well, I mean, listen. There's nothing more to say than I certainly appreciate listeners and viewers like Tim who value my input and the substance that I try to bring to the program. So I'm grateful for a statement to be made like that.
And the people that are on the show with you value as well, of course.
Without a doubt. Yes. They may not publicly admit it.
I just did. But no one values more than Charlie in Portland, Maine, who's up next.
Wow. What a transition.
We're going from the love to the fire.
Yeah.
What's up, Charlie?
Boy.
Let's bring this back to some reality, Lance.
Yeah.
Charlie, by the way,
Trust me,
Charlie, in all fairness, you know some things about, natural healing and stuff like that. Reality would not be one of your expertises, just for the record.
Nor would a pep talk be under his umbrella as well.
Well, I'm glad. I hope you send him the check, Lance. But that was very nice of him to say. But hey, I got a question. Did Brett Favre, was he a number 1 pick?
Brett Favre
Brett was drafted by the
pick.
Falcons, and then he was traded to the Packers. Yeah.
All right. So there's another guy, right?
Yes, like I said, it was quarterbacks drafted since 2000. I had to draw the line somewhere, Charlie.
Yeah.
All right. But I thought he wasn't a first-round pick.
No, he was not.
He was a second-round pick.
1991, and traded him away.
Yeah. Well, you could call in next week and give us the data that John went through from 1970 to 2000.
Yeah, but Charlie makes a good
and
point.
then Brett will make the cut.
Second-round pick, but also it was a second team where he blew up, which is a good point, Charlie.
Yeah,
good point.
Absolutely.
That's right. I'm just bringing that up. I'm just following what you guys say.
I like it. Good point. And by the way, how about Steve Young, another guy
the Niners
who had to leave the Bucs, right, to get to the 49ers in order to do that.
And he was behind Joe Montana and had to wait. But notice how far back we're going
now we're pushing
to the examples, you see? See, we're trying to stay in the real world, Charlie, of recent history.
Again, reality
not,
is not
when you were growing plants in your backyard and rubbing it on your skin for amazing routines.
Actually, I was a plant man back then. I had my own business called the Plant Man.
See,
so
I didn't lie. No lies detected. That's what I was
Charlie,
saying.
I am not going to ask you what type of plants you grew. Let's just move on to the next topic.
Correct. That's why I left it notice very generic, okay?
Hey, look,
open-ended.
Look, you guys are talking about the second round is now the third round. The third round back in the 80s is now the second round because of quarterbacks have been moving up. I mean, it sounds like, 70 is the new 50, I mean, that's what you guys are talking about. But besides all that...
Well, we're talking about the game has evolved. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I know. Look, what I want to talk about is...
We're not here to make you feel younger, by the way, if that's what you're trying to insinuate. It sounds like you're trying to get us to admit, don't worry, Charlie, age is just a number. You have nothing to be worried about.
Oh, I know that.
Yes.
I know that. And you could reverse those numbers, too. So anyway, hey, about Dable.
It's amazing the content he comes up with.
Not reality again.
I mean, just amazing. Yeah. We need to study your mind and do a documentary on it.
Unstable Dable, and he's trying to weasel his way back in play calling, and I don't think he should do that. He should focus on trying to be a head coach. And why is Kafka here if he's just going to have a clipboard and not call the plays?
Charlie, what do you mean weasel his way? It's his decision. There's no weaseling. If he wants to call plays, he's going to call plays. It's up to him.
He was 3-14 last year. He admitted it. I did a lousy job as a OC and as a head coach.
Charlie, my only point. No, Charlie. Look, I'm not arguing with you on the results last year. All I'm saying is that he doesn't have to weasel his way into anything because no one's making that decision except for him.
Well, I don't know. I think Mr. John Mayer had something to say about it.
No, well,
John Mayer, the guitar player? That's what it sounded like.
it
He
did
said,
sound
no?
like, yeah. Body like a
Hey, the other thing I want to bring up.
Oh, no.
You guys were like all over Penix last year. He's got too many injuries. Why would you want to bring him in? He's 27 years old. He's old, and now it's like Shook is like the greatest quarterback in the freaking world.
Charlie, when did I tell you? Charlie, when did I tell you? Charlie, when did I tell you I was more than happy to draft Michael Penix?
In the third round?
No, I said second round, and I would have Penix graded higher than Shook. From last year to this year. So I would have Penix higher than Shook, and I would certainly pick Penix in the second round the same way I would have picked Penix in the second round last year.
Would you take Shook in the second round?
He would be lower on my board in the second round, but I would use a second round pick on him. I told you I'd have Penix higher than Shook. I said that.
I know, but you guys are, I just hear more great things about Shook than I ever heard about Penix from
Charlie,
Charlie,
I'll be honest with you. The reason is you had 3 or 4 quarterbacks ahead of Penix last year. You do not have that same number of quarterbacks ahead of Shook this year because it's not as good of a class at the top.
Look, if we get stuck with, without Shador or Ward, then I would go with Ewok from Texas. I think he has the bigger upside. Or Melrose. Melrose a perfect guy, too.
With the third overall pick you're talking about.
No.
Oh, okay.
Third overall pick.
Well, I misunderstood what you were saying.
I'd move back.
So you would just wait to take a quarterback later on in the draft, is what you're saying?
Yeah, if Shador and Award are gone, in the door Shador is gone, then I would wait until, I'd move back, get a bunch of picks, and then I'd pick Melrose in the second round.
Jalen Melrose. I didn't know. He goes by Melrose now? Did you run that by him? You got him permission to call him Melrose?
No, better that is
Jalen Melrose.
Quit yours is Ewok.
Yeah.
I like that even better.
You have to have somebody translate Charlie to know which quarterback he's talking about so we know how to properly respond.
I like yours more than most. I have him right after Dart, so he'd be quarterback number 5 for me, I guess. I'd use a third round pick on him. Maybe top of the 4th round, something like that. Maybe the Giants comp pick in the round 3. I'd roll the dice there. I'd be fine with that.
Well, listen, the risk of taking a quarterback later on in the draft is not overwhelmingly high. So if the Giants do like somebody and they want to bring him in, and you got 2 veteran quarterbacks, so the urgency is not there to put the quarterback on the field immediately. I just think, once again, the expectations need to be realistic, John. If you're going to wait on a quarterback to say that guy is going to be the future at the position, I think is a bit getting ahead of yourself. I think if you take somebody with the 3rd overall pick, you take somebody high in the 2nd round, I think that maybe is a little bit more realistic that quarterback could eventually take over. But if we're talking about 3rd or 4th round, I just think, fans need to be at least a little bit more realistic that even if you take the time developing that player, the chances of that player still being around to spread his wings, I think, are very slim.
201-939-4513. Jim is in Pennsylvania. Hey, Jim.
Yo, guys, how's it going?
We're good, man. How are you?
Good, thanks. Hey, John, before we get into the Giants here, I used to love all your Knicks tweets, and I feel like as they've gotten better over the years, I don't really see as many anymore. What's going on?
2 children, one that is 7 and one that will be 3 at the end of April. The time is limited. I still watch all the game. I'm actually going to the game tonight with my buddy to see him play the Sixers. Once the playoff comes, there'll be a heavier volume of tweets, and I'm actually I'm going to pop on a couple of the other Knick podcasts around over the next few weeks as we get into the playoffs. But yeah, look, I still love him. I just don't. I barely have the time to do what I need to do, let alone do a whole nother project where you're not going to make a whole lot of money out of it. So, sadly, Jim.
No, I hear you. I got 15-year-old twins, so I know where you're coming from.
I miss doing it. I really do. But sometimes you have to pick and choose how you want to use your time. I heard Lance is going to launch a Knicks podcast. He loves the Knicks, and I think that's something that is right up his alley.
Well, listen, we can sit here and break down the potential first-round matchup with the Milwaukee Bucks if you'd like. I'm more than happy to maybe squeeze in a minute or 2 of that.
Have the Pistons passed the Bucks?
Yes, they have.
Ooh,
yeah.
Okay.
So that's the 3-6 matchup as we speak. And Damian Lillard's health and status is very much up in the air. So I'm sure John is ultra confident for the time being, but we'll see.
I would feel pretty good against the Pistons or the Bucks in round 1. Round 2 is a different conversation.
Well, Cleveland and Boston are cut from very different cloths.
Yes, and it looks like it's going to be. I would rather get Cleveland in the first round than Boston. I don't feel good about either team, but that Boston is just so good. So good. And you can tell they're revving their engines now. They won, 7 or 8 in a row now heading into the playoffs?
Well, they went undefeated on their recent road trip, which is tough to do.
It's not good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm gonna hit you with my Giants question now after we touch on the Knicks. So, now with all the rumblings heating up with Travis Hunter possibly as a third pick for the Giants, I guess I was just thinking then, given free agency and awesome additions in the secondary, if they move Banks to cornerback 2 and Drew Phillips, and nickel, and they're saying Travis Hunter would probably get used more as a corner, given like that great depth now in the secondary, and even if you did want to use him at wide receiver, I feel like we're pretty. Like we're, especially I guess more in the secondary. Just say it because I saw Dable said he looks at him more as a corner. So if you got where would he fit in there with all the depth?
Jim, I didn't catch that. Did Dable say that this morning that he sees him more as a corner?
Yeah, I've been on Twitter. I could have sworn I saw a reputable source that they were looking at him more as like a corner than a wide receiver. I'm almost positive. So I was thinking, if Banks is a 2 and Drew Phillips is the nickel, and they did. I mean, who knows? They could use them, do whatever they want. But the secondary is loaded right now. She's the corners.
All right, Jim. Appreciate the call, man. Good stuff. You can listen off the air as we were about 2 minutes away from wrapping up here. I listened to the whole Dable thing.
So did I.
Do not. I thought he was pretty vociferous about not committing to anything on Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
So Jim, I would check that. Just double check your source on that because I did listen to the whole thing and I did not hear that. So just check that.
Yeah, he stayed more in the gray area when Hunter came up, and I know we were talking about...
All draft questions was gray area. He didn't want to answer anything,
correct.
Really.
We were talking about this with Dan Salmone earlier, in case you're just joining us, but he said that it was just tough to evaluate Travis Hunter because of the wealth of film.
Yeah.
I don't remember him distinctly designating him as one specific side of the ball that they would go with.
I feel like that'd be all over the internet. With giant reporters if he said
I
that.
wouldn't give credit to any reputable source that there is a definitive line that has been drawn in the sand of how the Giants view Travis Hunter.
Now, Jim, feel free to send that to us. If you have it somewhere, send it our way, and we'll send another 3 or 4 minutes here, and then we'll get to it. But I didn't hear that.
And, I mean, just as far as if they did, let's say, hypothetically go down the road of viewing him as a corner, and I think most teams in the NFL, and I know I'm generalizing, probably do view him maybe more as a corner than a wide receiver. I'm not speaking for the Giants in that capacity. You still have the capability to have a set amount of plays that you could put him in at wide receiver if you want. And we talked about this. This is why, to me, he's such an intriguing and valuable pick, because if for some reason it doesn't pan out on one side of the ball, well, you can maybe salvage his usage by then moving him to the other side of the ball, which you don't have the luxury for most other players in the NFL draft. So I think that's a positive, but there's room for them to add another corner, and I would even argue another wide receiver on this roster. Because you have to keep in mind, everybody, John, that is signed and added in free agency, remember, is not guaranteed to make the roster. This idea to now bring out the roster and play the numbers game and say, oh, well, they have 8 corners and they have 9 wide receivers. Trust me, everyone's not making the roster. And everybody is not necessarily even going to be brought back to the practice squad.
Now, we've talked about the Hunter thing, and I agree. Easier to be a full-time corner, part-time wide receiver. Let me ask you it this way. If you want to maximize Hunter's value as a rookie, Lance, to help the Giants team specifically the way it's structured, would you start him out as a primary wide receiver or a primary cornerback?
I'd start him as a primary corner without any hesitation. If you're asking me about the bubble of 1 year, I think he can do more.
Who are you sitting on the bench?
At cornerback?
I mean, you got to bench Deonte Banks then.
Well, who's to say that they can't split some reps? You're not necessarily benching him. You're just maximizing the time and the awareness of both of those guys.
Then he's not a full-time corner.
Well, but here's the other thing. Who's to say that they won't move some of these players around, though?
No,
I'm not looking at it as that those are the only 2 outside corners. There's a slot guy. Mm-hmm. And who's to say that they don't, once again, mix and match with personnel?
Drew Phillips, I think they feel pretty good about that. I don't think they want to take Drew Phillips off.
No, and I get that.
And they just paid Paulson and Debo.
There's no doubt about it, but the way that I'm looking at it is we're also operating that ideally all of those guys are at your disposal for 17 games, which you know is not going to happen. Okay, I can guarantee you that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So I would say that if we're going to sit here and say, oh, I got 4 corners and I only have 3 spots and I'm worried about maximizing all 4 of them, they're going to find a way to maximize all 4 of them. I would not hesitate.
Here is my hot take of the day.
Okay.
And we have a month almost exactly. We're about a month and 2 days away from the NFL draft. Rather, 3 weeks and 2 days until the NFL draft. I believe, as of today, if the Giants drafted Travis Hunter, he will take more snaps as a receiver in his rookie year than he will as a corner.
Interesting statement. Why do you feel that way? Just because you're looking at the current roster?
I think you
and
can
feel?
fit more receivers on the field more often than you can cornerbacks. Deonte Banks is someone that I think they still have very high hopes for, and his physical profile is still so good. They brought in a new secondary coach. I think a big part of that was to get the most out of Deonte Banks. He still is only on the third year of his rookie deal. We just signed Paulson Adebo. Drew Phillips is on the second year of his rookie deal. It's a crowded room in terms of guys you want to play a lot. On offense, you just re-signed Darius Slayton, so he's going to be a big part of this, obviously. Malik Neighbors, we know. Wan'Dale Robinson's heading into his final year of his rookie contract. I think Malik Neighbors can do a lot of damage from the slot if he wants. I think Travis Hunter can do a lot of damage from the slot if he wants. So I think those guys can be moved around. You can play 4 wide receivers more often if you want. It's hard to play 4 corners the way your defense is set up. I think you're more likely to do 3 safeties and 3 corners if you're going to go to a dime package. So for me, I think it's easier for me to shoehorn Hunter into the offense with a bigger role than it is for me to shoehorn him into the defense with a bigger role. And here's the last part of it. With Brian Daboll being an offensive head coach and knowing and being so desperate, not because of the job stats, just because he's an offensive coach. He's had a pretty poor offense here the last couple of years. Desperate to have the offense be good. You can argue when Travis Hunter gets here, he's going to be the second or third best athlete on the team with Neighbors and probably Deonte Banks, to be totally honest with you.
Sure.
Right? I think it's going to be a hard sell to the head coach of your football team that could also be calling plays to not play with that toy if he's on the roster. And I think that's going to take an awful lot of discipline from the head coach not to say, maybe 50 snaps on offense, 20 on defense. Maybe we could do something like that. So that's my hot take of the day. My mind might change over the next 20 to 25 days when the draft is over and we hear from Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll if they happen to draft Travis Hunter. But that is my hot take of the day, that I think if the Giants pick him, he will play more offense than he plays defense as a rookie.
Well, I could certainly see him contribute to both sides of the ball. I just think long term, I would argue it's harder to find, in my opinion, a good cover shutdown corner than it is to develop a wide receiver, perhaps, that could give you explosiveness on your roster.
I agree with that 100%.
So I'm looking at it in the short-term best interest and then what helps his progress in the event that they did get him. Mm-hmm. That side of the ball, to me, is far more promising. And you could argue, remember, the wide receiver, and I'm taking this a little bit deeper, is at the mercy of the quarterback to make a true impact on every single play.
Sure.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
The corner, who clearly you want to be able to take away the football, but there are things that you can do as a corner to take away somebody on the opposite side of the ball where the ball may not be going because of your God-given talent.
And you're not dependent on anyone else to do that.
So that is another way, okay, that him on the defensive side of the ball is still making a significant impact, even though the statistics and the numbers are not backing that up. And that's how I'm looking at it and where I'm coming from.
And I think that's a good argument. But again, I'm going to rephrase the question to you. Take the future out of it. You want to maximize his impact in his first year.
Sure.
Is he playing more on offense or is he playing more on defense?
I would still say you can maximize it with what I'm talking about on the defensive side of the ball. So I will stick and stay with that because, you're talking about Hunter, Paulson Adebo, Drew Phillips. I understand I'm not eliminating Deonte Banks from the equation, but now we're talking about, 3 guys that are tough in one-on-one settings for the offense to solve.
It's a great cornerback group.
you mentioned it's going to be hard for Brian Dable to have that itch and pass up on it. It's also going to be very hard for Shane Bowen to back down and say, oh, yeah, take him on offense. Don't worry about it. We're perfectly fine on the defensive side of the ball.
You know who reports to who, right?
No, I know what the pecking order. I get it. But the defensive coordinator is still going to have a voice at the table to say, hey, give me the guy that I can use on the opposite side of the field for Paulson and Debo potentially.
No, I'm
and
with you.
I'll show you that. We'll make sure that run defense is a lot better because guys won't have the opportunity to throw to the sideline.
Lance, good times.
Absolutely.
All right, for Lance Medow, I'm John Schmeelk. That's Big Blue Kickoff Live presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the Giants. Everybody, stay tuned. Draft season will be coming up. That interview with Jameis Winston will be coming up on the Giants Little podcast feed. The draft season feed as well for draft season. Make sure you go check those out. And I got a bunch of interviews in the hopper coming up later on this week that'll start pouring out over the course of the next couple of weeks as we get ready for the NFL draft. For Lance Medow, I'm John Schmeelk. We'll see you next time on Big Blue Kickoff Live.